Hundreds of thousands of Iranians have filed through the streets of Tehran to mourn Qasem Soleimani. He was Iran's most senior military commander, and he was assassinated on Friday. Here are some of the pictures we've seen come in. This is the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, crying over the coffin. He led the funeral prayers. Iranian state TV is saying over 1 million people attended. We can't confirm that, but we can confirm there were hundreds of thousands. Now, General Soleimani was widely considered the second most powerful man in the country. As you can see by the scale of this crowd, for many people, he was a hero. Now, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif's been tweeting directly at Donald Trump saying, "Have you ever seen such a sea of humanity in your life? Do you still want to listen to the clowns advising you on our region? And do you still imagine you can break the will of this great nation and its people? The end of malign US presence in West Asia has begun," he predicts. Well, this funeral procession began in Baghdad, where General Soleimani was killed by that US airstrike. It then moved, as we've been seeing, to Tehran, and then from there to the holy city of Qom, before being taken to the general's hometown of Kerman, much further south, where a burial will take place on Tuesday. These are pictures of what happened in Qom as the crowd of mourners carried the coffin into a mosque. It struggled to get inside the building because so many people were pushing to try and touch the coffin. Well, here's the BBC Persian TV presenter Rana Rahimpour on her reaction to this outpouring of grief.
It seems that it's real, and it's astonishing to many journalists and observers that the turnout has been shockingly huge. And what's interesting is that we could see prominent figures of the opposition joining these funerals, and they said that this has nothing to do with our problems and our internal problems. In their view, Qasem Soleimani was a national hero, and his assassination was an attack on Iranians.
Why was he a hero?
Well, that's a very interesting question. That's what we've been trying to figure out. Why do they think that he was a hero? There are different reasons. One is that many Iranians believe that he fought ISIS. And he said it's because of him that ISIS is now not in Tehran raping Iranian women. They say he was not afraid of giving his life in order to secure Iranian borders. And they say that they differentiate between Qasem Soleimani and the Islamic Republic, which to many others is very surprising.
Now, Qasem Soleimani was born in the city of Kerman in 1957. In his adult life, he moved through the ranks of the Iranian military and became head of Iran's elite Quds force. That meant he oversaw Iranian and foreign militia across the Middle East, including in Yemen, Iraq, Syria and Lebanon. But back in 2013, a former CIA officer, John Maguire, told The New Yorker that General Soleimani was the single most powerful operative in the Middle East, and many people agreed with that for a range of reasons. He was believed to have been central in devising a strategy to help Bashar al-Assad resist the insurgency in Syria in 2011. He also worked with the Shia militant group Hezbollah in Lebanon, and he worked with the militant group Hamas in Gaza. You could focus on Yemen, where the Houthi insurgency has been extensively backed by the Iranians. And then, of course, perhaps most significantly, there's Iraq. During the 2003 US-led invasion, the general directed militant groups who were attacking US troops and bases. This Guardian article highlights that back in 2008, while the Americans were battling Shia militia in Iraq, the head of the CIA, David Petraeus, was shown a text from General Soleimani, and the text was reportedly said, "General Petraeus, you should know I, Qasem Soleimani, control the policy of Iran with respect to Iraq, Lebanon, Gaza and Afghanistan." And indeed, the ambassador to Baghdad is a Quds Force member. The individual who's going to replace him is a Quds Force member. The message was clear. While General Soleimani's life ended in Iraq, he was killed in a convoy close to the airport. Also killed in that attack was another significant figure, Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, a senior figure of the Popular Mobilization Forces, that's a Shia militia in Iraq. He was also commander of the Iranian-backed Khattab Hezbollah group. Now, that group was blamed by the Americans for a rocket attack that killed a US civilian contractor in Iraq late last year. And after the militia protested outside the US embassy in Baghdad for days, they were seen as being even more significant. Well, today, that group held a memorial in Baghdad. The BBC's Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, was there.
You can get an idea of the shock and the anger among Iran's allies here in Iraq at this place, which is the official mourning, the official commemoration for, they're there over there on the poster, Qasem Soleimani and Abu Maher al-Mohandes, who is the leader of one of the main armed groups here. You can see over there a line of yellow flags. Those are fighters from Mohandes's group. There's a lot of anger in there. It's quite finely developed, calm anger. People aren't yelling, but they want to get even. And the two countries they talk about most are the United States, Donald Trump, and Israel. The question is what happens next? What do the Iraqis here in Baghdad and also their allies in Iran, what do they do with this shock, with this anger? I don't think it's going to dissipate easily. You can sense it in the air, you can sense it from talking to people. There will be consequences, consequences that can't be predicted at the moment, but consequences that quite likely will make this already very difficult situation even more complicated.
Well, after assassinating General Soleimani, the US justified the move by saying he was actively involved in developing plans to attack US diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region. Now, we're not able to verify that at the BBC, and no verification has been offered to the US Congress either. Its members weren't involved in the decision to kill the general. More on that element of the story in a moment. First of all, his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
We would have been culpably negligent had we not taken this action. The American people would have said that we weren't doing the right thing to protect and defend American lives. President Trump has been crystal clear.
Is it that imminent? Is the threat, is what the attacks he was putting together so imminent and so big it would have been seen as that kind of negligence?
We made the right decision.
Well, Iraq's parliament's not convinced. After the assassination, it's now voted in favour of expelling American forces. Donald Trump's response to that was swift and to the point, saying, "We will charge them," that's the Iraqis, "with sanctions like they've never seen before ever. It'll make Iranian sanctions look somewhat tame." And remember, Iraq's supposed to be an American ally in this equation. Now, dramatic though those exchanges between the US and Iraq are, it's really the Iranian response, not the Iraqi response, that's being watched most closely. First of all, here's General Soleimani's daughter speaking at a ceremony in Tehran today.
Crazy Trump, arrogant and a plaything of Zionism. Don't think that everything is over with my father's martyrdom.
Well, General Soleimani's successor will be his deputy, Ismail Ghani. Here we see him earlier crying on the coffin of the man who was his leader. And this is what he said about avenging the killing.
اینه که اولا راه شهید سلیمانی رو با همون استحکام به حول و قوه الهی پیش میریم.
We will continue Soleimani's path. We will remove the US from the region in several steps. The Supreme Leader backs this.
در گام‌های متعدد ازاله امریکا از منطقه و حرکت استمرار.
Well, attention's already focusing on the Strait of Hormuz. We talked about it a lot last year because Iran targeted oil tankers there several times, and that in part explains what's happened to the oil price in the last few days. You can see that it spiked. It went higher again today after Donald Trump threatened those sanctions against Iraq. But whether Iran acts in the Strait of Hormuz or elsewhere, of course, we can't know. But no response appears highly unlikely. This is the former US ambassador to Yemen.
This was a decision of tsunamic proportions and the ramifications which we're not going to know for a while. But there were protests in Iran against the regime, and that now has flipped. And there were protests in Iraq against the Iranian presence, and those have now had all the wind taken out of them. We have a non-binding but still significant resolution for us to leave. We don't know what the Gulf states are thinking, but they have got to be deeply worried about how this escalates. I have worked in this region for a very long time, and I have never seen the situation this precarious.
Well, a key figure in deciding how Iran responds to General Soleimani's death is, of course, his successor, who we've just mentioned. Here's Bahman Kalbasi from BBC Persian on what we can expect from him.
It is likely very similar to Mr. Soleimani without, obviously, the connections and the recognition that Mr. Soleimani had. Obviously, him being in the crowd, that was very diverse is remarkable, because people who came out weren't necessarily agreeing with this new commander or Mr. Soleimani. Many of them disagreed with them, but they came out because it seems that they had a bigger priority, and that was to send a message that whatever disagreements the public in Iran has with the regime, it is not indifferent. It does not mean that they're indifferent to foreign involvement or possibly a war. So it throws the calculation of Washington to some extent into a challenge, because it doesn't seem that it has any sympathy inside Iran for the action it took, and probably united large segments of the Iranian society against Donald Trump and his threats against Iran.
And Pawan, for many years you've looked closely at Iranian involvement in Middle Eastern countries. Do you think the death of one man can fundamentally change Iran's policy in the region in the way that Donald Trump hopes it will do, in particular in Iraq?
Extremely unlikely, because it's not a one-person show. This is a foreign policy vision that has been in works for years, and the root causes of it comes from the Iran-Iraq war, that you have to have influence in countries around you so you don't have to go through a war, 8-year war that we did after the invasion of Iraq by the United States. The entire idea was they're coming for us next, so the only way to stop that is to go fight Americans in Iraq before they get to Tehran. So this foreign policy doctrine has been carried out by the IRGC since, and Mr. Soleimani was obviously instrumental and key in it, but definitely not the only one who's capable of carrying it out.
We'll have further coverage of tensions in the Middle East across the next half an hour or so. We're also going to bring you the latest on